In the heart of the Kingdom of Fife there lies the town of Glenrothes. Built in 1948 and located approximately equidistant between the cities of Edinburgh and Dundee, it was the second new town to be constructed in Scotland, and it's the third largest town in the county of Fife. It was originally conceived as a post-war new town under the New Town Scotland Act of 1946 and was designed as part of a plan to expand coal mining in the region and to build homes for the thousands of miners who would move across from the west of Scotland with their families. Many others would also flock to the area as part of another proposal to handle the overspill from and reduce the overcrowding in the country's industrial heartland Glasgow. The site chosen for its construction was an expansive section of agricultural land that contained a number of small rural communities between the parishes of Leslie and Markinch, and was to be erected around the already existing village of Woodside. The town truly has built itself up from such humble beginnings as being a one-street miners' row with nothing but prime agricultural land stretching out in all directions. The land upon which Glenrothes now stands was occupied by a number of farms for centuries before the town was built. Today's Glenrothes is divided into 19 uniquely named housing precincts. These are entitled after farms that once stood before them, such as Rimbleton, Tanshall, South Parks and Macedonia, to name but a few. Most importantly, however, you have Caskieberran. Caskieberran has a long history indeed, and it is one that spans several centuries. The whole precinct was once land that belonged to Caskieberran Farm. The name Caskieberran itself is a distortion of its original spelling and pronunciation, Caskieberran, which means path of the pass in Gaelic, and originates from the time of the Picts, who were an ancient race of Scottish people that lived in the region during the Bronze Age. As far back as the 1100s, the Weems clan, who were once the most powerful family in Fife, residing at Weems Castle, which sits atop the cliffs between the villages of East and West Weems, owned much of Fife, laying claim to estates that branched out all across the land. In 1319, Sir Michael Weems established the estate of Caskieberran by what was known as perambulation, which means to determine the legal bounds of an area by simply walking around it. It should also be noted that Caskieberran back then also formed a section of the parish of Kinglassie, centuries before Leslie would even be formed. From then on, many generations of the Weems clan lived within the Caskieberran area in what would likely have been little more than diminutive stone cottages. One of these buildings would later hold a lintel with the date 1651. The exact location of the estate of Caskieberran was where today's Caskieberran's Lammermoor Crescent now resides. A notable member of the Weems clan was a certain Sir General James Weems, who was born in Caskieberran in 1610. He lived there with his wife Catherine and their son, also named James. In 1629, at the age of just 19, he would travel to the City of London. And by 1638 was a general in King Charles I's army. He was skilled in manufacturing what was known as light ordnance, primarily leather-covered cannons and rifles for King Charles's military, giving him the title Master Gunner of England and General of Artillery in Scotland. He commanded King Charles I's army in many British civil wars. And then for his son Charles II in the famous Battle of Worcester in 1651 against Oliver Cromwell, which would prove to be the final battle of the English Civil War. In the aftermath, James and King Charles II's army were defeated in this decisive encounter. Charles was lucky enough to escape capture by hiding in a nearby oak tree. But James was captured and imprisoned within Windsor Castle. And was eventually freed in 1654. In 1666, he would resign from his position and return home to Scotland. He died the following year, leaving his son James to inherit the estate of Caskieberran. In 1672, the young James left Caskieberran, where he was entitled as Lord Burnisland thanks to his aristocratic social standing, and moved to Burnisland Castle with his wife Margaret, Countess of Weems. The lintel with his initials can still be found upon this bastion today. After his leaving, the Caskieberran branch of the Weems clan soon ended, and others came in their stead to farm the land. Many farmers and their families came fleetingly over the many years that followed. and the farm naturally began to expand with the advances in farming methods and technologies. And finally, in 1849, the farmhouse was built. The structure was designed by a Leslie-based architect known as John Skinner, and was built by Henry Mitchell, also from Leslie. It was to be a traditional stone-built Scottish farmhouse, yet proved to be rather luxurious for its time. The front of the building faced southeast, with the master bedroom enjoying a grand view across the land to the forth. Whilst in the rear, there was also a substantial stone-walled garden. But of course, there were also numerous outbuildings which were comprised of straw sheds, holding pens and several barns, each with a different purpose from the other, such as the housing of dairy cattle, livestock and mounts. In addition, there were also 2 servants' houses and tenant farmer cottages. By this point, the whole of Caskieberran farm amounted to some 252 acres, which extended to the boundaries of both the Tance Hall and South Park farms. Across the southern periphery of this land, there lay the Leslie railway line built in 1858. This ran past Caskieberran all the way from Cabbage Hall to Markinch, and is now where today's Bublingen Way can be found. The railway line also served to mark the boundary to Stenton Farm. The rocky mound that you can observe here can still be seen in Caskieberran today. The original road that led to Caskieberran Farm is now today's Golf Course Road. This thoroughfare was originally named Caskieberran Road, but had its name changed when the Glenrothes Golf Club was built in 1958. A point of interest about this particular area is that in October 1921, a middle-aged man and woman died from exposure whilst walking along this road. They were deemed to be of the tramp class, as was reported in the Dundee Courier, and must have been exposed to the harsh Scottish cold for a very long time indeed, for it to have taken its toll on them in such a tragic way. To get to Caskieberran Farm, you would have followed Golf Course Road before turning into what is now today's Tance Hall Drive, which led to and crossed a Leslie railway bridge that still stands today. This thoroughfare passed by Tooten Cottage, which now has a road named after it, and continued east right through the northern end of modern Caskieberran, whereupon it would encounter a pair of enormous sycamore trees that still stand strong today. The road curved south between the trees, and from here it led straight to Caskieberran Farm. In 1868, a Robert Braid came to farm here. Very little is known about Robert, other than the fact that he was born in 1822 in Logie, Cooper, and had a wife, 2 sons and 3 daughters. However, several minor incidents happened during his time as farmer at Caskieberran that made it into the local newspapers. In his first year there, the Fife Herald reported the theft of one of Robert's spades that had been stolen by a James Black. Black was ultimately found guilty of the theft and imprisoned for 30 days. On New Year's Eve in 1887, the Fife Herald reported that one of Robert's ploughmen, a Robert Ewan, was drunk when he approached Mr. Braid and aggressively demanded some wages that he claimed to be due. Braid denied that he owed him this money, and Mr. Ewan was consequently arrested and charged with a breach of the peace. 1 year later, in 1888, the Dundee Courier reports that one evening, Robert Braid, along with a John Nichol and a James Watson, were all arrested for vandalising the telegraph insulators along the Leslie railway line between Caskieberran and Warrout. They were seen and identified by William Arnott, the farmer of Stenton, who was working in his field at the time. The 3 of them appeared at Cooper Sheriff Court and were each given the option of a £1 fine or 7 days imprisonment. In 1892, at the age of 68, Robert passed away, leaving behind his wife and children, who subsequently moved away from the area. The following year, in 1893, a John Laird and his family came to Caskieberran. He had a wife named Agnes and a son and daughter named Bessie and Alexander, respectively. Before relocating to Caskieberran, he owned a horse and carriage hire business at Townshead Farm in Kilmacombe, Renfrewshire. John and his family, along with the various farm workers in his employ, would farm Caskieberran for the next 30 years. During Laird's time here, the First World War broke out, and 2 of his ploughmen, George Marshall and 19-year-old James Christel, were called up and enlisted in the Royal Scots, with both being sent to France in order to fight. In 1916, the 2 men came to some misfortune and were later reported as missing in action. James Christel was to be found 9 months later, though sadly he had been killed in action. His name can be found inscribed into the Leslie War Memorial. George Marshall, however, was never found. At the beginning of the 1920s, John decided to sell the farm, and in 1923 he finally sold up and relocated to 11 Claremont Crescent in the city of Edinburgh. That same year, following in his footsteps as a caretaker of Caskieberran Farm, was a Mr. John Smith. Smith had a wife named Margaret, 3 sons, James, William and John, and a daughter named Jenny. Before John Smith and his family arrived in Caskieberran, he had served as a farmer of Ballingull Farm in Leslie since 1919. John Smith, though, wasn't a local man from either Leslie or indeed from Fife, having originated from the small village of Torfichan, which is located near Bathgate in West Lothian. Following the move, however, he came to be regarded as a well-known and respected farmer during his time at Ballingull Farm. He was a deeply religious man and was in fact an elder at Christkirk, a church located in the periphery of Leslie village, for many years. His community activities also extended beyond the realm of faith, seeing him serve as the president of the Glenrothes curling club for numerous years also. At Caskieberran, John would attend to the rigorous farming duties needed to sustain a working farm. Whilst his wife Margaret, who shared a similar work ethic, would help out as much as she possibly could. In the mornings, she would rise out of bed with her husband and prepare breakfast, and upon having seen John off to work, she would have cleaned the family home, taken care of the children, and attended to the other domestic tasks that were expected of a farmer's wife. Farming techniques evolved yet again across the years, reducing the need for heavy physical labour to be shared between the farmer and his spouse, yet her workload was never seemingly lightened by any significant margin. And in Margaret's case, she would have had to retire to bed early each night, following the completion of her familial duties, ready to face another arduous day. When John and Margaret's children reached adulthood, they would subsequently meet and marry other farmers due to their agricultural connections. This would then see them move away to other farms throughout Fife. After their son William married, he stayed on at Caskieberran, having 4 children of his own: John, Bill, Marion and Margaret. William's oldest son, John, who was born in 1950, now lives with his wife and brother Bill on a farm in Elgin. He rather kindly returned to Caskieberran to share some of his fondest memories of growing up on Caskieberran Farm.
Name is John Smith, and I was born at Caskieberran Farm in 1950. The farm itself, the memories I have were mostly of it being a dairy farm. There was roughly 40 milking cows, and I remember them being milked in the byre and the buildings on the farm. I remember the crops in the field too, the binder working and the old combine working as well. Basically working on the farm, just going as often as I could with father, just helping on the farm, just doing things that I could, driving I remember the first time I drove the wee Fergie tractor. I would be about 5 at the time, and driving it and driving the trailer behind and father on the back, feeding the cattle out in the field off the back of the trailer, things like that. Fairly typically it was based around the cows, feeding the cows, growing hay or silage to feed the cows in the winter time, growing grass, the cows going out to the fields to eat the grass in the summertime. There was potatoes and sugar beet were growing as well. Basically just worked round the farm, whatever was going on the farm, depending on the time of year. Most of the time you did that, and then weekend, Sunday always tended to be a day of just doing what needed to be done. Obviously the cows had to be milked twice a day, but the rest of the farm work stopped, and usually on a Sunday unless at harvest time. Sunday was a day of rest, a day of going to the church, and afternoon off. Farmhouse, I remember if you went in the back door, there was a sort of what you would call a utility room now, where the tub washing machine was, and the old mango with the handle for drying the clothes. Went into the kitchen, there was a coal burning black range. That was the main source of heat in the kitchen. Through the kitchen, off the kitchen there was a pantry. There wasn't a freezer in those days, it was just a sort of cold store. You went through the kitchen into quite a main central hallway, and there was a stairway up from the hallway up to the bedrooms upstairs. There was probably 4 bedrooms upstairs, of various sizes. Downstairs there was a sort of dining room, a front room, and then a sort of more everyday day room for watching telly. Coal fires, there was no heating. I always remember it being cold in the winter time. Adjacent to it there was a cottage where traditionally the dairyman, he stayed because it was nearest to the farm, nearest to dairy, so that he could go to the cows. The rest of the workers on the farm stayed in cottages that would be about 400 metres maybe along the track towards Glenrothes at the time. And as far as I can remember, there was four cottages there. There was a row of cottages, and the workers stayed in there. The farm buildings were mostly the accommodation for the cows, and there was an old barn, and I remember the old stackyard where the stacks were built before the combine was invented, and there was a straw shed just for storing, keeping the straw dry. I just remember it as it was all been farm ground, with Glenrothes just starting to be built. It seemed miles away, but it was just on the other side of the road. But everything to the south and east was still all normal farm ground at that time, and the other side as well, as far as you could see, was all being farmed. Remember the railway line and the trains going along, the old steam trains going along the railway line quite regularly. The main track into Caskieberran was pretty rough. It was just an old rough track, and the postman always complained about all the potholes on the track. And in the winter time it tended to get filled up with snow quite quickly.
So like, that was the tree you used to play on as a wee boy?
Yeah. Farm road went down there, came along there and round. As far as I remember it, they just looked so out of place now. I don't remember them being as far apart. I just remember the two trees, and always thought they're bigger than they are. They always look bigger though. I suppose when you're wee they do look bigger. But it was just somewhere you could go and you could climb up on and just play about on. Swing. The swing on it must have been on that branch on that side, because that was away from the road. You weren't allowed to swing on the road because the road went between the two trees.
What do you mean between the two?
Farm road went down there. Came from Leslie, because the shooting cottage down there. And came up here, right hand bend, and there, down the hill, and then down to the farm there.
One of John Smith's tenant farmers was Tam Galloway. He and his wife lived in the tenant's cottage that was located just to the northeast of the farm. He had two sons, Thomas, who was born before Tam came to the farm, and Gordon, who was born at Caskieberran. His youngest son, Gordon, began assisting his father to tend the land, learning the ropes of farm work from an early age. He now lives at Balsillie Farm in Leslie.
Gordon Galloway, born at Caskieberran in the cottages at the farm in 1941. My dad worked on the farm, mum worked in the dairy. I left school at 14 and worked on the farm as a tractor driver, doing all sorts of farm work. We grew cereals, potatoes, sugar beet, turnips, all that sort of work. We made hay, made silage. I must have been about 7-year-old, maybe 8, before there was any electricity in that house. It was all paraffin lamps at night in the winter time. That's what you had for light, paraffin lamp, until we got electricity in. I could remember we didn't get to light the paraffin lamp back in the early 40s until the blackouts were up towards the tail end of the war. As I say, you had to have wee blackouts on the inside of your window that blacked out, that stopped any light from getting out during the war. I could remember back at the tail end of the war, there was a Alec Watson and his wife stayed in there, in the one next to us. And I could remember him and Dad standing out at night, and they used to watch for the German bombers going up the Forth, aiming for the Forth Bridge. I think at that time it was something for a Saturday morning. You got 5 shillings for a Saturday morning, which is what, 25 pence in the day's money. For 4 hours work, 5 hours work, 7 o'clock until 12. There's not much more I can remember. I think it's that long ago. Once something like that finishes, as Caskieberran did, you tend to forget everything.
John Smith maintained a notebook, which he used to take observations and keep records of the hours his farmers worked, as well as the wages earned and due. Gordon's father Tam appears in the book numerous times. I brought this to Gordon to see if he could remember anything of interest and possibly give some insight into it.
Lifting kale, remember doing that. some of the names, I could just about remember everybody that worked there, Ken. And there was a Jim Dees that I saw here, doing as a tractorman. He was the son of the dairyman. His mum and dad were in the dairy. Further ahead there. And really, when they finished up, it was McCracken, boy McCracken that came as dairyman. And he left, and there was a boy, the Wallace. I've never seen his name in here. Colbrane is not allowed to cross the Cow Bridge.
Where would the Cow Bridge have been?
I remember that being talked about, but I can't remember exactly where it is. That would be on Leslie House, Sir Robert Nairn's estate.
Spencer Nairn.
I think the Cow Bridge. That bridge actually went to a triangular field. It was cried Fletcher's Island. And if you stood up on the railway, you could see that when the railway came through, it had cut a corner off a big field belonging to Insterney estate.
Right.
And it was left on Caskieberran side, so they just put it into Caskieberran.
Right.
And Fletcher was the name of the guy who had Insterney at the time, so they cried it Fletcher's Island. Because it had the railway on one side and the burn running round the other side of it.
In 1958, Gordon brothers Thomas had a son, Sandy, who was also born in Caskieberran and still lives there to this day.
My name's Sandy Galloway, and I used to stay on Caskieberran farm with my mother and father. I stayed on the farm right from birth, probably until I was about 5 or 6 years old, probably 6. So that would be we would have left the cottage houses that we stayed in round about 1964 or thereabouts, and we moved over to Rimbleton. My memories of the farm sort of are quite good memories. As a young boy, it was a brilliant place to come and play. Everything was fun, you know. Used to play in the hay shed. I used to play in the totty shed. Used to go out where the grain was stored and play amongst the bags of grain. Great place for hide and seek and stuff, you know. Absolutely brilliant. Good memories. I remember right down the very bottom of the fields, we have what we call Boblick Way now. That used to be the railway line, and it was steam trains that went round the railway line. And every now and again, especially in the summer, the train would set fire to the fields. So it was a case of getting the fire brigade doing as quick as possible to put the fire out. And we would have the gate open, and the fire engine would come tearing down right through the middle of the farm, right down through the cornfield to put the fire out. And as a youngster, well, we all liked fire engines out. It was something else to see in those days.
The tenant farmer cottages that the Galloways lived in stood where today's Shield Court in Rimbleton now is.
This is roughly where the house stood. It was right in the middle of fields, so you had fields to the left of you and fields to the right of you. So when we used to look to the east, you would see right across the fields and you'd see St Paul's Primary School. Down the way, if you look down here now, there's houses obviously. It's all been built. You used to be able to look down to the old railway track that would go round to Leslie, and fields obviously. The cottage would have been just at the back of us here where these houses are. And it went obviously west to east or east to west, and they were looking south. The front door was south facing. The road would have went down here, and when it got down to the bottom of the road, it would have met a track, another farm track. One went along to the farm itself, and one went out to St Paul's School. It went through between two fields and out to St Paul's School. Further up, where the snooker club is, there was a big trees up there. There was a road that went for there, and that went out towards It crossed what is now Burbligan Way. It crossed the railway line that went all the way around the bottom of the fields, and that went out to the west of Glenrothes. I dare say at one time that was one of the main roads coming into Glenrothes. That's about it, really. I can't think of anything else. There's nothing here that I can look at and say, it reminds me of the farmhouse or should I say the cottage houses that we stayed in. It's been built on for quite a number of years now. This tree that's here, this is the last remaining tree that can be seen. You can actually see it on an aerial photograph that we've got, and it's right over to the right hand side here. So this field here, it used to be at the back here, and as you can see there's houses being built. That's how much they've developed it. It's a sheltered home. But that field there, that used to have horses in it and sheep. That was quite a small field compared to the rest of them. But right at the back of the field here, these buildings here, they used to have tortoises and neeps and grain stored in them. Obviously there's the farmhouse. The tractor shed was on here, and in here there was a byre where they used to keep cattle. All the implements, farm implements, was up here. And round the back of the farm there was a hay shed in here. That's where we used to play on the swings and that. And that was the main road down to the farm, which came for the top of the hill all the way down to the farm. This road out to the right here, past all these trees, you can just make them out. That was the road that went along to Caskieberran farm cottages. That's where I stayed when I was on the farm. And for anybody that remembers the town when Roots used to be there, the cottages were just across the road for Roots. So it was quite close to the farm and certainly within easy walking distance. So here we are now. We've walked all the way up and we've walked along the road, and I think we are probably standing roughly behind the house, on the other side of the house, the back of the house. And if I turn this way, that's roughly how the farm would be. We've come along from the right and we've walked all the way along here. That road used to go up, and that would come out at what used to be the Oast House. There's big trees at the top of the hill. I think they're still there, but you can't see them from where we're standing. And if we turn round this way, the house used to stand roughly around about here. And again, because it was elevated, in those days you had a good view all the way down, past the factories that are now there, past all this wooded area here that's been put in. It was all fields, so you had a good view all the way down. You'd see right down across the Forth, no problem. Once it was demolished, as a child, I used to come down here and play down here. There was always remnants of the farm, boulders and stuff, and we used to play with it and amongst the boulders. And in those days, it was great to make a wee gang hut or whatever, you know. But it's all gone now. It's all memories. That's about it.
Near the end of the 1940s, the planning of Glenrothes was in full swing, with all of the farms and villages in the parishes of Kinglassie, Leslie and Markinch all set to be bulldozed, and the rural land devastated to make way for the new town. Naturally, this move angered all of the farmers. And with the help of the local farmers' union, they sent an entreaty to the government, pleading with them not to remove them from their land and destroy their farms. But this proved fruitless as a new town was created as a government act. Ultimately, they had little choice but to accept a lump it or leave it payment offer for their homes and farmland. In his later years, John Smith's health started to deteriorate. Some years before, he underwent a bowel operation from which he would never fully recover.
He had an illness. I think in the 1930s that required an operation, sort of bowel related, I think, and he had a wound that didn't heal after the surgery, and he just had to be careful, had to just keep a dressing on it and just watch what he could do. He obviously couldn't do as much manual work because of that he would maybe normally would have done. But it didn't seem to interfere too much. He could still go bowling and curling, so he was still quite active, although he had that problem, if you like.
John retired early from farming due to his continual health problems before he and his wife relocated to a house in Douglas Road in Leslie. His son William would take over as head farmer.
Because he was running it as a young man, really, because he would only be 25 at that time when he started farming here at Caskieberran. He worked hard. He enjoyed what he was doing, and I think he enjoyed the dairy, the cows. Most he was into pedigree Ayrshire cows, and he liked to make a good job of them, and he was always interested in how well the cows were milking, and he was trying to improve the breed all the time, and trying to get better bulls to improve the stock, improve so that he was getting more milk and more production. And I just remember it just was a lot of work, but it was just how things were, and tend still to be, but he enjoyed it. And, yeah.
In 1950, John passed away. His remains were laid to rest in Leslie Cemetery, and just 15 years later, he would be joined by his wife Margaret.
As far as the actual running of the farm was concerned, he had actually retired and was staying in Leslie by that time, so it had no direct effect on the farm. Father just was running it anyway, so it was a sort of like a seamless transition anyway. It just meant that Father was doing it in his own name rather than reporting to Father, if you like.
In 1951, Caskieberran was acquired by the GDC. Glenrothes was already well under construction by this point. Taking its starting point from Woodside in the east and progressing westward to Newcastle and Leslie. Because of this plan, Caskieberran was lucky enough to be one of the final few farmsteads to be taken over by GDC. The Smiths would receive a sum of some £16,750 for their land, and were still permitted to remain there until it was time to move on. William would then spend the next few years looking for another farm for him and his family to move to. In 1959, William and his family moved to Cairndinnis Farm in Haddington, East Lothian. William still legally owned Caskieberran, and he continued to farm there, moving back and forth from his new farm in East Lothian every now and again to do so.
We left, it was the end of November 1959 when we moved to East Lothian. But for the next at least 4 years, Father still had some of the land here. It wasn't all taken over at one time, so he was still farming here at Caskieberran as well as farming in East Lothian. So he was going back and forward between the two places. The farm was one of the farms that was sort of compulsorily purchased for the development of Glenrothes new town. There wasn't an option, and it was a matter of Father finding somewhere else to farm. So that was it, and he was lucky he found somewhere that he did.
As he could not run the farm full time anymore, William handed the responsibility of running Caskieberran Farm over to Tam Galloway, and Tam and his family then moved into the farmhouse.
Well, we would move into the farmhouse when John moved to Cairndinnis, when he moved to Haddington. That would be in the late 50s, 58, 59 maybe. We moved into the farmhouse for the cottage. After that, the last few years it was mainly just grain, cereal and potatoes that was grown. John Smith's brother, Bill Smith, he had a farm at Cairnben. He came up and kept an eye on things, and his other brother, Jim Smith from Remeldrew.
In 1965, however, the GDC took full legal possession of Caskieberran and all of its land, with the Galloways and other farm workers now having to vacate the farm. Afterwards, all the farm's outbuildings, the barns, sheds, holding pens and tenant cottages were demolished. That same year, the first phase of Caskieberran's housing development had begun. At this time, a Glenrothes amateur boxing club was in the process of being formed within the town. The GDC's initial plan was to turn the Caskieberran farmhouse into the club premises. Before this could happen though, the farmhouse was severely vandalised. Due to the extensive cost of repairs on top of these needed for the proposed modifications, the GDC decided to demolish the farm building itself, and in doing so, the last remaining link to the historic Caskieberran was taken with it. 700 years of history of people who lived, worked and died there were all but swept away.
I can remember at the time when Mum told me that we were moving, I was quite upset at the whole idea. The thought of leaving and all that stuff. When you're 9-year-old, it was a big change, and it was sad. But I think what did help was the fact that we didn't just go away and stay away because we were coming back over a period of time. It sort of broke it up a bit, and we could see Glenrothes gradually developing. We could see what was happening to the area, and you know, by the time we had to move, I think we were quite glad that we weren't there now. You know, we accepted that, you know, things had changed. And it was easier. The gradual transition made it easier.
Sandy's dad, Tam, took the Caskieberran farm sign with him when they had to leave the farm. Sandy's brother, also called Tam, now keeps the sign at his home in Rimbleton.
So whereabouts did you see it just lying about?
It was just lying about a part. I think it was in a sort of utility room in the house, in the farmhouse. Where's
Do you think that would have been the sign then? For the entrance?
would be the sign, but I could never ever remember it being at the end of the road.
Put it this way, there wasn't anything else with that name on it.
No.
So it must be the original sign for
It is
there.
the original sign.
In the years that would follow, Caskieberran grew and expanded from nothing but bulldozed farmland to what it is today. More recently, Caskieberran has seen its buildings demolished and rebuilt to form new housing. Making it a quiet and desirable residential area within the town of Glenrothes. With its open green spaces, parks, woodland areas, and views that stretch out as far as the eye can see. Its present and future iterations share little in common with the past, though. Yet the two sycamore trees that mark the beginning of the road to Caskieberran Farm and the tree behind Lammermoor Crescent still continue to stand proud, relics left behind from the time of Caskieberran Farm. The stories they could tell us if only they could talk. As the years inexorably drift by, the first-hand accounts and stories from the few remaining people who once lived at Caskieberran Farm will inevitably be lost amid the never-ending march of time. As for the many years that are still to come, Caskieberran will undoubtedly continue to change, to evolve, as the buildings are demolished and rebuilt and its people come and go. Places, like the individuals who live there, are permanently in a state of flux. Yet, amid the impermanence of life, the only inescapable truth here is that as time continues to pass, it would be as though the farm was never here.